You're listening to the Middlemen Podcast with me, Tom Lemongello, and my co-host Todd Zawicki. Our careers have put us in the middle between retail, media, and brand. But retail media is a closed loop, so we're here to open up the channel and let you listen in. Join our discussions with the people who make retail media happen. Hey Todd, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. It's another exciting chat that we just had with an amazing analyst from the space.
Yeah, so we had a chat with Sarah Marzano. She's been in her role for a year or so, but one of the things that we really like is that she came from being a buyer at Lord & Taylor and Macy's, and so she's got that practitioner's lens, and she's really sort of trying to figure out, okay, why isn't, like, I've heard that in-store is the next big thing. Why isn't it happening really right now?
And it is a really good perspective, and she makes this comment like, it's great that Kroger's is doing this cool new in-store launch, but it's 2 stores.
Yeah, we got really excited about what they are doing in the store.
Oh, and it's wicked cool, right?
Screen.
Looking at it, all of it is awesome. And I can't wait to see it in all 2,300 stores. And I think that's the unlock. Like, we got to go from 2 to 2,300 and not have it take 20 years. Like, that to me is I think the critical question in front of all of us in retail media is, how do we unlock in-store? Because it's such a critical aspect of what the value of retailers. And if you think about it, and one of the interesting discussion points with her is this concept of time spent. Like, we talked about how digital advertising was going to grow like a weed, because in terms of time spent over the last, this was a Mary Meeker kind of comment for years, the percentage of ad spend versus time spent was way lower, it's disproportionately low. And I think if we're going to look at retailers, is the amount of, even as e-commerce has grown, time spent in stores hasn't changed. It's still, right? It's still this incredibly meaningful amount of time, and it is woefully undermonetized. Like, it is the big unlock from a retailer standpoint, is unique. It's something the big platforms can't compete with, and it's a meaningful audience. And so it's hugely valuable, and it's going to be awesome to see retailers unlock it. And it's, how do we do it faster, and how do we help retailers justify doing it faster from, not in 20 years, but we can do it in 3 to 5. I think we could see this tidal wave happen, and it could really be one of the things that helps unlock this full funnel, full buying experience with regards to retail media, and really connect the dots between merchandising and trade and retail media.
I think it's finally crystallizing for me. This is when I was back at Quotient, the next horizon was CTV. And I think for Walmart buying Vizio, Amazon having Prime Video, for them, it is CTV, because it's very easy for them to leverage that channel with their scale, et cetera. But for their other 15%, for Albertsons, for Kroger, for, now even Best Buy, it's imperative. And Sarah's going to show us some data that shows why it's imperative for these retailers that have a bigger in-store presence than they have e-com. And she goes through, where it is in the country. And like, there are real spots where you can really light this up and make in-store really be the promise of full funnel media for retailers, and especially grocery, electronics. It really is something that should happen. So to your point, how do we get this to happen in 1.5 to 3 years? I think that would be great.
No, it'd be ideal. And the other thing, I think she also touches on a topic we've also talked about for the last year, about the organizational challenges on the vendor side, right? Yeah. Sales versus marketing, who controls the budgets, who controls brand budgets, where does sale, and it just, there's so much cool stuff you can unlock when that gets figured out. Full funnel campaigns, there's a lot of creative ideas that you can take advantage of. The cool thing in terms of targeting that you can do within retail media is legit and is real. And if we can unlock some of these formats and creativity, it's going to be amazing. And just like we saw with digital, like 15 years ago, it was like, oh, we could do the amazing things we could do with digital. Just the right people on the buy side showed up. We could really do it. And I think we're at that point with retail media. It kind of reminds me of digital, maybe, call it 2012, 2015. We finally kind of started seeing those unlocks and some cool campaigns happening. Now, we're still going to have to figure out, which is, how do we pull in the brand agencies? How do we get them in the loop in terms of retail media? That's still an unlock. We've had some other guests on this topic. I think what we're doing is, how do we unlock that 15%? And again, it won't be cutting down the spend on Amazon, but how do we grow substantially that 15%, so 15 becomes 30? Or 40 or 50, because when you look at some of those in-store stats and you look at their traffic and you look at their revenue, Amazon's total percent of retail sales is a couple of points in terms of the total landscape. And when you add up all that 15% of retail media spend, their spend in terms of consumer spend is much higher. And so there's still huge opportunities there.
Yeah, and we're going to link to Sarah's report in the show notes. Anybody who reads this will get as excited as Todd is about this. It's a pretty long one, so
she's
buckle
great.
up.
Super knowledgeable, awesome listen.
Welcome to the Middlemen Podcast. We are here with Sarah Marzano, who is at eMarketer. You probably have seen her on LinkedIn. She always writes great reports about retail, but she started as a buyer for Lord & Taylor and Macy's, and then she had a stint at Circana and at Gartner. In the short amount of time I've gotten to know you, it's been great to hear your perspective as somebody who's a practitioner as well as an analyst, because of the feel that you have for, what are the brands and the retailers really trying to accomplish. So we're really excited to have you on today to bring some of the latest reports that you have on in-store media, on the impact of Gen AI. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. You covered sort of the gist of it, but I studied merchandising at FIT and I started my career. I spent the first 5 years as a buyer, first at Macy's and then at Lord & Taylor. And I think even though that was a while ago at this point, like it sort of inherently shapes my perspective to how I cover the retail and e-commerce industry as an analyst, and particularly in my current role where I'm really focused on retail media. I sort of can't help but apply that retail first lens to how this industry is unfolding and developing.
What's your perspective on retail media from a merchandising standpoint? I think that's one of the interesting things is that as Tom and I, right, I've got sort of an ad tech, MarTech background. Tom's got some buyer experience. He's been at a CPG company as a brand manager. And so one of the things, like, neither one of us has been a merchandiser in a store. And, I think one of the real questions is, how do you think most merchandisers think about retail media? And have we been missing the boat in terms of how merchandising and retail media should be thinking about each other and potentially working together?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. And I think, one thing that I noticed when I first started covering retail media about 2 years ago as an analyst is, like, when I started, the loudest voices were all media voices and media background. And it really felt like
we're loud.
Yes.
we media people are loud.
It felt like the slogan or the motto was like, retail media is media. Like that was like the thing everyone was saying.
Right.
And I sort of get it because it sounds catchy, but like I felt like I was sort of sitting in the back being like, no, wait a second, like it's merchandising. And I still believe that. Like when it's on a retailer's owned and operated property, whether that's in a physical store or on a website, it's merchandising, right? It's about showing the customer what is hopefully the most contextually relevant product to fit their needs, right? And so back when I was at Macy's and Lord & Taylor, like retail media wasn't a thing, but a lot of the tactics that I used on our websites to make sure that we were showing the right products and highlighting the right things sort of mimic what's happening, hopefully, when retail media goes well, right? But I think that that's created the fact that there is like this sort of like overlap in capability or goal has created some unnecessary tension and conflict between sort of historic merchandising teams at retailers and the retail media teams.
Is that because you think in part the merchandisers had trade dollar budgets and now there's this other team selling things too? And are they seen, likely as competitive? Is that something we can surmount? Is there ultimately, I think what we're trying to understand a little bit too, in terms of the rise of retail media is how do retailers do a better job here? And how do we think about the future? And, a future I think that we all agree and we'll talk about, which is that's being underserved as we start moving into in-store and in real world activities. And is it maybe fundamentally that what's holding back some of that future we want to talk about is this dynamic between merchandising teams and the retail media teams?
Yeah, no, I think there's a few pieces. I think one is that some of the budget that gets used for retail media ad buys is reallocated trade budget, right? And I don't know if there's like necessarily a lot of awareness about how money flowed from brands to retailers, right? And how that's been happening since the beginning of retail. So trade funds going to support things like promotions or markdowns or end cap displays, all of these levers that brands use with their retailers, right, to help drive product. And the reality is that a good portion of the budgets that go to retail media are simply reallocated, right? And for the brand or the advertiser, they see it as like, okay, I'm sending money into this channel in order to drive product, right? And however I can do that the best. But until the incentive structures are aligned within the retailer, then you can end up, and I think we do end up in a situation where the success of a retail media team might be coming at what looks like the expense of the success of the merchant team, right? Because all of those trade activities go towards supporting inventory sell-through and meeting margin goals, right? And those pieces being really important to the bottom line and the bonuses of these merchandising folks. So I think that's, a huge piece of the tension, the conflict. And I think the other thing is just simply, when I think through back to when I was a buyer at Macy's.com, and the top fold of the page was my storefront, right? And so that's where my merchandising took place. And that happened either from me manually locking things to the top of the page or working with my site merchandising team to ensure that our algorithm was set up correctly based on what part of the season we were in, what promotional event we were in, and really aligned back to the goals I had, whether those goals were highlighting the newest products that were still selling at full price or churning through older marked down inventory where we had a lot of on hand. And anytime you're sort of messing with that really valuable territory, it needs to make sense, not just for the customer. It needs to not just feel really contextually relevant for the customer. That's a huge part of it. But it also needs to make sense for the broader retailer's goals, right? And there are instances where ads are being shown, in really valuable slots that don't align with what the merchant team's goals are. And that's going to create conflict as well.
I think that's totally fair, and it works toward sort of mix of where the products are on the page. But to some extent, there's been a big success on the retail media team side where they've been able to bring sponsored products in, and they've figured out how to at least manage relevance to some extent. But usually that doesn't have a lot of coordination with what's happening in the store. And you just put out a report about how in-store media is moving, and I think it was delayed. It was supposed to be $1 billion, by what was it, 2020,
2028.
2028.
Yeah,
Now it's not until 2029, which would only be 1% of all retail media.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So tell us about that, and you're based in New York. How easy is it to find retail media in store in the wild?
Yeah. Okay. So lots to unpack there. So, yes, I write an in-store retail media report every year. Like, it's an important topic. And I think what I really wanted to do this year was sort of get away from this, this inclination to sort of wax poetic around like this massive potential, right? Because I think that's sort of been well established that there's a ton of potential if we can only get in-store to scale, right? We all have heard that the stat that more than 80% of sales happen in physical stores ad nauseum. I'll probably say it a couple more times on this episode, but I wanted to get away from that and really focus on sort of what is the holdup here? What are the barriers to scale, and what could realistically be done to solve them? And there are sort of a bunch of things that sort of I came across that I think are hopefully sort of useful. I think one of them is just the comparison of really the difference of the retail landscape in e-commerce versus the retail landscape at a total or at a physical retail level. And the fact is that retail media, I think, seems a lot more mature than it actually is, because most of the spend is online and most of it goes to Amazon, right? And
Yeah.
Amazon can do that. They're good at what they do, but one of the best things that they have going for them is their scale. They drive about 40% of all of e-commerce retail in the United States, right? And so really in e-commerce, only Amazon has to do well for retail media to look really impressive, right? Because they have that scale and that reach that's really appealing to advertisers. I pulled some data around the market share of the top retailers within total retail and found that it is a lot more fragmented. Essentially, there isn't an Amazon equivalent in the physical retail.
Not even close. Like Walmart, as one of the largest ones, is what, like 5% of in-store? Like, it's insanely small compared to what you see with e-commerce and Amazon.
Yeah, that's right. And so what that means is that it's going to take many players finding success right? For us to start building scale and momentum that feels meaningful relative to the total share of retail media ad spend. I think to that point, because we're seeing this develop in sort of a slower and piecemeal way. I live in Brooklyn, and I sort of, because of I work in retail, I sort of joke sometimes that it feels like I don't even live in America. Like I don't have a lot of big box stores close to me.
Yep.
I don't have a car. And so I like one of the things I've been doing both for the report I wrote and also just because, I care about in-store retail media beyond the report is pushing myself to go find retailers where things are activated and actually experience it in person. Right. And I've had to go to New Jersey to do that.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
Poor you. I before we moved to Seattle many years ago, I lived in New Jersey, so I can appreciate the comment though. But it's not even going to New Jersey for in-store media.
Yeah,
you got to go to like Ohio.
You got to go to Iowa,
new,
Hy-Vee,
right? You got to go to the 2 stores in Ohio that they've got set up, and Best Buy deprecated all their original first-gen systems that Keith set up. Now they're relaunching other things, and God knows where those are going to be. So I think it's like it's not New Jersey, it's Ohio, it's the South, it's everywhere.
No, I know. I just don't have any budget.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yeah. So I think just talking about like the regional differences, like one of the things I was sort of thinking through and trying to solve for was I feel like on one end of the spectrum with in-store, you get into this sort of what I would call like a testing trap almost, where a retailer will put all of their effort and innovation in like one center of excellence or a few test stores, right? And they'll have all the flashiest solutions there, and it makes for a great press release, and it does make for a great testing environment, right? To see how the media performs and how the consumers who are shopping in the store respond to new technology or new formats. But at the end of the day, it doesn't do what is so compelling about in-store for advertisers, which is provide that reach, right? But on the other end of the spectrum, like we'll use Albertsons as an example. I think they have 2,300 stores across their banners. And the thought of scaling new formats across their entire footprint likely feels like such a huge undertaking, almost impossible, right? And so I was thinking through like what's the middle ground, here that could be reached. And I think I'll acknowledge like retailers have all different kinds of ways that they could analyze their store footprint or their fleet of stores to sort of figure out a prioritization. But I used some data from Placer AI. They looked at Walmart's stores by geography and just found that, for example, in the Northeast, Walmart really over-indexes on e-commerce and digital traffic, whereas in other regions in the South, they over-index on store traffic, right? And so it makes sense to me to use things like your traffic to your stores versus your website to sort of think through like, where are we prioritizing our efforts? And again, I think there's a lot of different ways retailers could look at doing that. But I think it's a key component of saying like, let's not get stuck in this place where we've got this one store in, whatever location that's got all the bells and whistles. Okay.
But you've got the data. And so you had a great graph in the report that showed that, I don't know, it was either the Southwest or, some other parts of the country where e-commerce penetration is lower has a much better in-store balance and where the purchases happen. I think you put Amazon versus Albertsons and like, tell me like what that comparison means.
Yeah. So when you bring up the Amazon Albertsons comparison, one of the things I was trying to sort of visualize there is how there's so much more potential for retailers who aren't Amazon if we can nail things like offsite and in-store. So what I did was I compared Amazon and Albertsons from the perspective of site traffic. And you can imagine, like I used like the dots that like represented the size. Like Amazon is huge compared to Albertsons, is about 500 times larger from the site traffic perspective. But then I took their loyalty program, and Albertsons loyalty program data is about a quarter the size of Amazon. So we're getting closer here. And then I looked at their store footprints. Amazon has about 600 stores, that's including Whole Foods, while Albertsons Companies has 2,300, right? So now Albertsons is actually much larger than Amazon from that comparison, right? And I think that's an exciting way to sort of illustrate the weight that other retailers can carry in this space if we can only get away from this fixation of monetizing owned and operated websites, right? Which, especially in grocery, is quite a small part of the entire business.
Well, I think that's a fascinating point of view here in terms of, Tom and I have worked with some retailers and made sort of the same point. Like your store is unique. The environment is unique. It is not digital. It allows you to do something that you otherwise wouldn't do. And by the way, when you talk to the marketers at brands, they're desperate to have these human touch point interactions.
Mhm.
And now the problem is from retail media, are you talking to, or the merchandisers are talking to the salespeople, not the marketers, and it becomes sort of a Venus and Mars situation when you look at it from the vendor standpoint, like the organizational.
Totally.
Oh, right. So the merchandisers are selling to the salespeople, but the brand people on the marketing side are the ones who control the retail media budget. And Sam's not talking to Jill, and oh crap. And but the store, like the traffic piece of it is, to your point, like if the retailers looked at it and said, where are we unique? Where do we really compete well with Amazon? And we're beating them with in-store traffic.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that if they started looking at that stat and realizing, oh right, let's lean into where we're different and unique and have scale. Like the amount of, we put the amount of Americans going inside of Amazon, Albertson, sorry, completely, Amazon got stuck in my brain. Albertson stores, right? That's probably 100 million people every month.
Yeah,
that is a huge number,
Yep.
right? And dwarfs their 6.5 million website visitors. And
Mhm.
so it just screams that there's this opportunity. And then if you think about this from a, we always talked about digital for the longest time, about if you looked at time spent online, its share of media dollars was woefully low, and eventually it should normalize, and it has.
Yeah.
The next box
you
to
have
look
to
at
do
is
what
in-store
Mary,
traffic.
you have to do what Mary Meeker did for the internet. And I guess Andrew has done some of that before you.
Lots of big shoes to fill.
Yeah,
But right, what the biggest point is to say it succinctly is the right, as a percentage of dollars spent versus time spent. In-store time spent is probably the most under-monetized traffic we could be thinking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of time spent, and that's where I think why Tom and I have been excited about it. We haven't quite crystallized it in the same way till we saw your report. So everyone should go sign up for eMarketer and read your report, Sarah. It's great. And I think this is kind of the direction that we can all be thinking about, which is right. These retailers are sitting on a gold mine, under monetized gold mine in terms of their in-store traffic. And they thought about, oh, right, how do we maximize the value of that traffic in addition to just sales from a media standpoint?
Yeah, and
they could really do something here.
I think you make the case that grocery, it's really an imperative for grocery because of the high frequency. People are going to the grocery store every week. But you also have this situation where they are not, teeming with screens. They don't have screens on every aisle. And that's why I thought that the new RMN update from Best Buy was very interesting, because part of, it was really at the end of their presentation, but they were showing that they are going to leverage the laptops, the TV walls, all the things that make what we would have thought, like, Todd mentioned earlier, Best Buy originally started on this path, but maybe it was too early. But if you could leverage all the screens that are in an electronics retailer, oh my God, you have so many opportunities for media. So do you think it'll happen faster there than the grocery world?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the reason I fixated on groceries so much is that they're a big reason for that 80% of transactions still happen in physical stores. Like, they're a huge category. They're nearly 20%. Food and beverage is nearly 20% of all retail, and something like 92.5% of it still happens in physical stores, right? So monetizing grocery online is not quite as ineffective as like a tree falling in the forest with no one around to hear it, but it's only going to get these folks so far, right? You have other categories that have much more meaningful share of their transactions happening in e-commerce, right? And so the idea of like spending a little bit more time saying we're going to keep optimizing on-site makes sense, right? But I think the fact of the existing sort of inventory, which the merchandising provides with an electronics retailer, is definitely interesting and compelling.
Yeah, I think there's definitely two strands of where the marketing needs to happen, or the merchandising actually needs to happen there, which is, am I going into a Best Buy to pick up, I lost my headphones and I need to replace them? Or am I trying to understand how to buy a 3D printer or buy a very expensive TV, and I need to be educated? And I think those are totally different merchandising challenges.
No, and I think that's, that brings up a great point, which is that one of the things that's really exciting about in-store as an analyst, but is probably very daunting as a retailer, is that the formats are really diverse, right? It's not like online on-site retail media where we're talking about sponsored product ads, sponsored search ads, and some display, because there's a sort of homogenous way that consumers peruse a retailer's website regardless of the category. But in physical stores, like the formats that are going to lend themselves well to success in something like an electronics retailer are probably going to be pretty different, and the content as well, than something that's going to work in grocery, right? And so that creates a lot of complexity as well. And you just mentioned a few of the different sort of purposes that could be behind a trip into a Best Buy. I think a lot about some of those higher consideration product categories and the need to have content that educates customers and helps them build that confidence to purchase, and how that's going to be more immersive content. It's going to probably be a bit more interactive than you would need in a grocery setting.
Yeah, I mean,
But I
they've
think
got
one of the things,
an IKEA store within a store to teach you sort of how you're supposed to be laying your house out. And like those are the types of things where it takes much more, obviously at some point the web will figure out how to do this, but it's going to be a while.
I'll push back on both of you a little bit there, which is that, and I think you're seeing Kroger's approach in terms of creative support with their rollout. Again, sadly, and we don't mean this in a negative way, 2 stores. Like I wish it were 20 stores, and I can't wait till it's 200 stores. Kroger execs, please go faster. Not retail media. You people are doing great. I'm trying to help you sell your bosses, and do more faster in terms
you
of.
may need to go back out there and visit and see how they're doing.
But my point is, I think that I agree with you. Different content and grocery is different, but I think what's happening, and it's kind of a call out to agentic AI, which is your ability to produce video snippets, is going to be so much easier and less expensive than it ever was.
Yep.
And you can put those screens, and we know how to serve video ads. We know how to target video ads. We know how to do addressability. Like there's a ton of stuff. Like the plumbing works fantastically. You can be targeting based upon, expected audience footprint in a store and all sorts of cool stuff. And I think the missing layer historically has been, right, only the biggest CPG brands have video assets. So only like 1% of the products in a grocery store had a video creative attached to it. But now with agentic AI, everyone can.
Yep.
And maybe that's maybe one of the unlocks here, as we've talked about creative, is like that might be kind of a missing piece, which is, and I think video does well for helping highlight, in 15 seconds. Like the good thing is around social is it's helped us figure out 6 to 15 second video ads. And that type of format could work as you're going down an aisle, and that might catch your eye and cause you to pull something out of a grocery or C-store or something else. But I think agentic AI starts being, help solving the chicken and the egg, chicken being demand and creatives, the egg being supply and screens.
I think that's a huge part of it. And I think just being able to produce content and produce really personalized content, right? Whether that's by geography or time of year or time of day, and just being able to have more content at the sort of fingertips that's sort of ready-made for the environment. And it brings up a good point. So when I was writing my report, another thing I tried to do is I tried to think through like which formats make sense in which contexts. And I'll take an example like smart carts, which I think are great. I went out to a ShopRite, and they have caper carts from Instacart, and I test drove one. And it was fun and it was great. And I'm a big fan. And I think it makes a lot of sense in a grocery store. Right? In a grocery store that's not in Brooklyn, because we don't have room for smart carts here. But I think it makes a lot of sense to have.
Oh, for sure.
I'm picking up a lot of things. Self-checkout's been around for long enough where I know how to scan them. And I am in a mindset where maybe I sort of know overall what I want, but I don't know exactly what I'm going to buy. So if I'm scanning oat milk and then you tell me that like the oat milk is 2 for 1, like I might make a purchase decision based on that. Or if you
is that 2 for 1 historically? That was trade spend, not retail media, which gets back to organization and retailers and vendors merge these things. For God's sakes, it's one thing.
That's an entire, like, I feel like we could have an entire podcast on just that piece of it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a good follow-up. We get into the organizational design and how it's holding us all back. And gosh, forbid everyone finally figures it out that it's one thing.
And I'm doing some surveys of retail media networks to hopefully highlight like how much of a mess this all is. Like that's my job. I'll point out what a mess it is, and then everyone else.
And it's unintentional, and we get the historical issues and all that, but people bring it all together.
Totally.
By the way, the smart cart is a great example. I think there's other thing Tom and I get super excited about is that technology is like the screen technology is getting so diverse and less expensive. There's so much cool innovation that's coming out, right? Whether it's the e-tags. You mentioned, so we hadn't even talked about smart carts. Like, freaking, like Wegmans has been experimenting with that too. And so it's fascinating to kind of imagine. I absolutely agree. Like that is, as a media guy, I go, that I can imagine some really cool stuff I could do with that screen. Right? Like, I could, that's a great call. I didn't even thought about that. Like, and then as a buyer, like what's funny is in the media side, people are always trying to do new things and try new things and target new things. Like that's like every RFP for those who aren't media people. There's always this section of like, basically pitch me on something new,
Yep.
right?
Right.
In a media budget, as part of these, there's always dollars set aside for the new innovative things, because people are just sick and tired of just buying the same old every single time. Like, I'm buying this banner, I'm buying that sponsored search result, whatever.
Mhm.
Show me something new and cool. Like, I agree, like a video ad as I'm walking down the aisle talking about what's, like, if I'm on the chip aisle, getting ads related to that would make a ton of sense.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the things is that, like, smart cards aren't going to make sense in every retailer.
Right, exactly.
Sponsored product ads make sense for every website, but like smart cards don't make sense within every physical setting, right? So the formats are really diverse, which means there's not a playbook. There's not like,
Right.
okay, I want to do in-store media, so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think I could make an argument for digital screens in almost any retailer setting as long as they're done right with the right set of content.
Right.
But something like a smart cart, something like in-store audio, something like sampling, something like a scan and go within your mobile app.
Totally. It's an awesome, I'm imagining the media plan in my head, like, this is really cool stuff. And you know what occurred to me as I was listening to this? This actually kind of points out another organizational problem, which is agencies aren't buying retail media. They're the ones who are really good at planning these full-scale, end-to-end customer journey media plans. And so right now you have the RMN people basically filling in that role, and you have the buy side, but the agencies have been a part of that. And that's what they're really good at is right, building out these multi-stage, multi-component, complex campaigns, which actually, one of the benefits of all this complexity is it really speaks for the need, as we talk about programmatic and it's kind of killed a lot of media buying and creativity. Like, this is the stuff where human, for at least the time being, no agentic anything is going to be able to map these out because they're new and innovative. Like, there's a lot actually of value I can see coming to the different players, and let's get those, like, the agencies, please come and solve for this, because these are some cool concepts that we're riffing on right now that if I'm a CMO, like, I would find that pretty cool, right? I could really do buyer journey from TV to online to in-store, different components. Like, there's some fun, cool, interesting stuff. So if you're a creative, at which most media people are, the marketers on the vendor side are, like, this is cool stuff to be thinking about or imagining or wanting to do, at least in my mind.
No, I completely agree. And I think as retail media pushes into being more of like a, not to use the buzziest word ever, but like a full funnel marketing lever, like some of the big challenges lie on the fact that we need a more cohesive way to pull budgets, right? Because retail media can do so many different things. It can hit so many different objectives, but it's really sat in this like lower funnel bucket for so long that tapping into those national and those brand budgets is a huge challenge, because each brand, I can stick to the brands, not necessarily the agencies, is going to be siloed and have different organization structures. And I think that's like a key component as well to scaling this spend. Because I think while we know advertisers are desperate to or eager to reach audiences at the scale of physical stores, that doesn't mean they're also sitting on like a pile of money that they're sort of waiting to spend if only there were digital screens to do that in, right? These budgets are going to have to pull from somewhere in order to get this thing started. And so breaking down those silos and those historic ways of doing things is going to be crucial.
Well, maybe the opportunities, and again, up as the media guy here, so as linear TV dies and those budgets, maybe that's the money that has to show up and has to move over. And again, agencies want to still manage that. Like, to me, it's like, Mr. and Miss Agency, here you go. Here's an opportunity to really create some really interesting and effective campaigns. Now, again, the lack of scale in store is a bit of a problem on this side, which is just so painful to all of us who want this all to take off and imagine so much cool stuff and see, the pictures of the 2 Kroger stores and the cool screens they built out, and some of the pictures from the Best Buy, and we've seen some others, of in-process things. And there's a lot of cool stuff, but it's, again, 1 or 2 stores, and can't wait for it to be everywhere and anywhere. And can imagine a lot of really fun, interesting things that are going to emerge. Oh, if only.
All right. I think we got that rant out. I think that we went as far as we could with in-store, but I also want to make sure we have a little bit of time left for talking about another report that you let us see, which was around not the generative AI that Todd was talking about in terms of creative capabilities, but instead sort of what the consumers are potentially looking at now, which is, instead of Google, they might be looking at ChatGPT. And they might be, in my case, not looking at New York Times Cooking as much anymore, and, just looking at my fridge and saying, hey, I have asparagus. tell me what I'm making. And then I run to the grocery store and pick up the missing things.
Yep.
So your former colleague, Andrew Lipsman, was on Eric Seufert's show, Mobile Dev Memo. They were very harsh on this use case turning into an agentic commerce capability where you ask what you should buy, and then the agents go and buy it for you. I would say that their description of it sounded to me like just subscribe and save. Like it was, oh, it's going to buy you salt and you don't need salt. And it's like, my experience has been that it comes back and gives you suggestions. And if you want to do it, you say yes. What do you see as the opportunities for retailers to be involved in this whole change in user behavior?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I will go ahead and admit that I also fall on the side of skeptic when it comes to like truly autonomous agentic commerce, right? Maybe it'll happen. I guess like the tech is capable of it. I don't necessarily think that consumers are asking for it.
Well, I think you as a merchandiser know, like if it's something I truly don't care about buying, like, dog food that I buy the same every time, then sure.
Yeah.
Paper towels, sure. But if there's a merchandising opportunity for me.
And I think that's the thing. I think like that's like there's so many sort of facets of this agentic AI thing, like whatever we want to call it, that are all sort of playing out. And autonomous agentic shopping is a really buzzy, flashy, like fun one to talk about. I think the more immediate sort of evolution that's happening is around the fact that these universal LLMs, these AI shopping assistants, are having a really meaningful impact for the consumers who use them sort of earlier in their purchase journey, right? During their research and their consideration phases. And I think this is an arena where the technology is solving a pain point. It is solving a problem, right? Because it's making it more sort of contextually sort of personalized, distilling a lot of complex information and allowing consumers to talk like human beings, right? When they're trying to sort of figure out the best place to buy something. Or, you mentioned recipes. I use it for things for my toddler all the time. I'm like, I've got one banana, so give me a recipe for banana muffins that I can send to daycare, right? And it's able to really personalize those. And Adobe put out some data, like, right, they have got insight into referral traffic to retailers' websites, and they can start to sort of infer.
That's because basically retailers all sort of outsource their websites to Adobe or IBM or
Yep.
Well, Adobe Analytics too is a part of that.
That's another
right. So they don't use Google Analytics for competitive reasons. They use Adobe Analytics for that. That's where it's coming from.
And so they looked at like over 1 trillion retailer websites and were able to look at the user behavior from AI referral traffic, which is a really small part of retailers' total traffic, but it gives us some like early reads on like what's sort of happening here and how retailers should think about this. And they found some stuff that I think is like good news, right? Which is referral traffic from AI sources has a much lower bounce rate. It was like 23% lower. On average, they spend more time on a retailer's website and they look at more pages, right? So it's like an acquisition tool is really compelling, right? In terms of bringing in engaged audiences who are sort of primed for discovery. That same study did find that conversion lagged. I think it was 9% lower. It's important to note that gap is closing because they looked at the same data from a year prior, and I think the conversion gap was like 43%. So the gap is closing. But to me, that sort of tells me like potentially these aren't customers who are primed to buy and in a buy mindset. They're using these tools as part of, again, their discovery and their research, right? So
which means it doesn't replace the need for retail media and merchandising and convincing and all of that still that we're talking about. That's not going away. I think the bigger point is all the things and the purpose for retail media, it's not going to die tomorrow.
That's exactly right. And I think we have precedent for new surfaces emerging where we know are influencing the path to purchase, like social media, right?
Yep.
Plays a huge role in many consumers' path to purchase and even drives some commerce now, whether that's directly like within the apps, within the checkout, or by sending out to a retailer's website to complete that checkout. But that hasn't killed e-commerce, right? The trick is that it's another arena, another place for retailers and brands to sort of adapt and think through like, how do we show up on these channels, right? How do we make sure that we are present where our consumers are spending time, that we're primed to fulfill that transaction however they want to do it? So I think that's like sort of the closest precedent that we have for what's happening here.
Yeah.
Well, and I think an extension of that is that at a lot of times the new thing doesn't replace it, it expands it. Like
That's right.
in-store traffic hasn't declined. What's happened is e-commerce traffic has shown up and added to. And so even as e-commerce has exploded, in-store retail is still growing.
Yep.
And it hasn't. And so I think that's the other thing is that we just assume, oh, it's going away. No, no, no. It's additive in-store traffic. And you've got some great charts that we'll show here on the screen for the people watching in video about how in-store shopping preferences aren't changing. They're static at worst and growing, and still you're seeing increased in-store visits. So even as people become more digital, they're still doing things like going to the store.
That's absolutely right. And we saw the same thing with mobile commerce, not getting rid of desktop commerce,
Right.
with social commerce, not eating e-commerce, right?
Right.
Like, not even if these things are making a meaningful difference, right, and factoring in a large way to how consumers shop, and they're increasing their share, like the pie is getting bigger, right? And we're not seeing the predecessing channel go away, right? And so retail still needs to be really good at retail. Like we can't abandon that just to focus on.
So yeah, let's think of that world where things are still additive, and there's potentially more time spent on site. The Adobe stats say that, right? So if you're a retailer, where are you investing? Or if you're a marketplace, potentially, do you need to make we were talking about this in our last episode. The brands probably need to invest more in the PDPs and more in potentially the in-store media and things like that. And maybe the LLMs are going to pick up on that in some way.
Yeah.
And you had an interesting part of your report talking about what is the role of loyalty in that new world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think loyalty is it's an opportunity for retailers in this new world, but it's not a new opportunity, right? And I think loyalty programs have gotten stale. They've gotten overly complex. They've become not fun for customers to figure out, right? I think every loyalty program I sign up for promises me exclusive and personalized rewards, and I don't remember the last time I ever got one of those, right? And so I think there is an opportunity that has always existed for retailers to make their loyalty programs better. And perhaps that opportunity has some new urgency behind it if we're thinking about a meaningful new service that's going to sit between the consumer and the end retailer that might create some disintermediation in terms of that end relationship. But I think the fact is that the majority of retail is still going to happen on a retailer's website or in their physical stores. And those are the moments to create those relationships with your customers and to reinforce that value and reinforce that brand love and that loyalty that causes a consumer to, in the future, say, I'm going to pick this retailer, right? For these reasons, right? It's either the rewards they get from their loyalty program or the value alignment that is more sort of purpose-driven that I know this retailer kind of stands for. And so I think
But in your report, you're saying, this could be scary if the loyalty data from the retailer somehow gets in the hands of the LLMs. The retailers could be in some way disintermediated. Maybe they're still fulfilling, but
no, I think that is the case if your loyalty program is just about giving a customer the best price. If that's all you're doing, then it's really easy in this new world where you have tools that can help consumers sort of navigate and game the system and figure out exactly where they can get the best price. It's really easy to become completely disintermediated, right? And so I think retailers who have been like lazy about their loyalty programs until now, right? There is a real risk, right? If that's the way this plays out and if we're competing on price alone. We did an event last week with eMarketer where one of the retailers I pointed to was REI. They have a purpose-driven loyalty program. It's a co-op they obviously pay to be a part of, but they contribute to causes that they align with and that their customer base align with. And they create a situation where I could really see saying, no, I'm going to buy this national brand from REI, like no matter what, right? Even if it's available at a different retailer, even maybe in the case where I could get it at a better price from another retailer. And so that's what really like retailers and brands need to be focusing on and thinking about.
It sounds great. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. We had a great discussion. And is there anything that you'd like us to let the viewers know about how to find you or your reports or your next event?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be at a few events over the fall. I guess the next one, I don't know when this episode's going to air, but I'll be at Grocery Shop.
Great.
Yeah. And then I have some great research coming out later this year where I'm surveying the retail media networks themselves. Because as an analyst, I felt like we had a ton of ad buyer insights, right? And they're great. We want them. We want to keep them coming. We didn't have a lot of insight into the internal workings of the retail media teams. And I think that is going to be hopefully a valuable tool when we think through things like what cross-functional alignment needs to happen, how are other folks building in this space. And so that research will be coming out later this fall. So
Great.
just plug that for marketer.
Thanks again for joining.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me just ramble.
All right. See you next time.